So this is part 2 of a sermon from last week on the Seven Trumpets, and I decided to have a printout today that I'm going to hand out just for visual, because we covered a lot of information last week. Had a bit of feedback that it would be good to have some visuals, so I decided to pop my notes on an A3 piece of paper and print out a map. So if the deacons want to come forward and just hand that out, I only got 20 copies, so if you can sort of share maybe a couple each row. Some rows would only need one. That's the map, and that's the notes. Oh, actually, could I have one? Because I didn't write any notes. I don't know. So I better read off my notes. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so there may be some here that weren't here last week, and I'm just going to quickly step through a very brief summary. So we're covering the 7 trumpets of Revelation, found in Revelation chapter 8, and the trumpets start in verse 2 of Revelation 8. Verse 1 belongs to the seals. But verse 2 is probably the chapter should start at verse 2 instead of verse 1, but that's okay. So Revelation chapter 8 and 9 is where we'll be today. So if you have your, what are they called, bookmarks? Pop it in. Revelation 8 and 9. And last week we considered three titles that Revelation chapter 1 gave of Jesus. Do you remember what they were? Revelation 1 gave three titles to Jesus. It says in, I think it was verse 5, that Jesus is the faithful witness. And that gave him the credentials in the letters of the 7 churches. He was the faithful witness. Christ is a witness here today. He sees the thoughts and the intents of the heart, and his letter to the churches is based on his ability to know the intents and the heart of his people through the church ages. He is the faithful and true witness. And there was a second credential name was given to Christ in Revelation 1, and that was that he was the first begotten from the dead. The first begotten from the dead. And that credential gave him the ability to open up the seals. Because of the resurrection, the death and the resurrection, he purchased this world. He was able to redeem the titles of this planet. And then the third credential, which we based our presentation on the 7 trumpets of Revelation, is the credential that Christ is the prince of the kings of this earth, or the ruler of the kings of this earth. And so that on a nationalistic level, Christ is ruler. And we're here and subservient to an earthly government. And we are to pay respect and our dues to that government in accordance with the word of God. Render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's. But what we must always realize is that there is a power above all nations. All the kings of this world have a ruler over them. And this gives him the credentials to sound the 7 trumpets. Last week we looked at the beginning of Revelation 8 and verse 2, and it says that there were 7 angels which stood before God, and to them were given 7 trumpets. 7 angels with 7 trumpets. And because this writing was given to believers of the Old Testament scriptures, the story of Joshua would have come to mind, where the priests, the messengers, the word angel just means messengers. These priests, 7 priests, were given how many trumpets? 7 trumpets. And they went around for 7 days, 7th day 7 times, And what fell? The walls of Jericho came down. 7 messengers having 7 trumpets to bring down this great city, a very well fortified city, to the point that the inhabitants didn't think it could fall. And there was a typology of another great city which we looked at last week. This great city, and in Revelation it calls this great city Great Babylon. And it's again drawing our attention to Babylon, the great Babylon of Nebuchadnezzar. But it's a typology of a greater empire than that, which was indeed the Roman Empire. Roman Empire in all its facets, in its pagan form and in its papal form. And so we looked at briefly Daniel chapter 7, where this beast, this Roman beast, consumed the whole earth, in that there is not one part of our planet that has not been touched by the Roman power, whether it be through the 10 horns in colonialism, whether it be through the religion of Catholicism, whether it be through the tentacles of its power. This world has been gotten hold of by this great dragon, this great city, the Bible said. And we looked at this city, how in Revelation it says that the city was divided into how many parts? How many parts? You remember? 3 parts. Revelation 16 says that the city had 3 divisions in it. 3 divisions. We also last week established that the 7 trumpets, while ever very, very similar in description to the 7 last plagues, are not the same thing. We established last week that the 7 trumpets have a time frame, and the time frame is given by views of what is happening in heaven. And it started off with that there was a censer, given, and much prayers of the saints before the altar, and the incense, much incense, and this shows that an understanding of the Hebrew sanctuary and its timeline, that the 7 trumpets, for the most part, and we will look at, happen during Christ's heavenly ministry, pre-1844, so pre-investigative judgment, into the most holy place. The description is that there is the work of the first apartment going on, as described in Revelation 8, 2 through to 5. But it continued, and it showed a time where this censer was going to be thrown to earth. And so we should expect that the 7 trumpets actually cover not just the first apartment ministry of Christ pre-44, but there is an element of it also post the close of probation. That timing is given just by the glimpse of heaven. And so you can see in your chart today, this is really a program, God's program of destroying the great city. You know, when you go to a concert or something, and isn't it handy to have a program? And you know, well, we've got this event, we know we've got a little break so we can go to the toilet, so we'll hold on and we'll wait for the break, and then after the break we've got these things coming up, and you know, the 7 trumpets is God's program of bringing down a great city, not Jericho, but the great Roman Empire in its 3 divisions. What were the 3 divisions? The 3 divisions that we looked at were the Western, Eastern, and Papal divisions. 3 segments, and we looked at the broad strokes of the 7 trumpets and how they are broken up into 3 categories. How many categories? 3 categories. You have 4 trumpets, as you can see on your diagram here. There are 4 trumpets that happen, and then there's a break. And then there are 2 trumpets which happen, also known as 2 of the woes, because the last 3 trumpets are of a different caliber, called woes, and that's the fall of the Eastern Roman Empire, and the 3rd, which is to come, the 7th trumpet, is the fall of the whole papal system, which we're going to break down. And I put a note down the bottom. You'll notice that of the 7 trumpets, 6 of them are symbolic language, deep, heavy symbolic language, and so symbolic that it's confused so many readers of the Bible. Very symbolic. but there's one literal one, which is the seventh. It doesn't use symbolic language, it uses literal language. But the 7 last plagues are the exact opposite. When we're looking at the 7 last plagues, there's only one symbolic, 6 of them are literal. And we'll look at that briefly. So, just again to cap, we saw in Revelation 8 and verse 6 that there was the first trumpet which was to sound, and it affected a third. So this is a division of Rome which is going to be broken. You'll notice this third comes up all the time throughout the trumpets, a third part of this and a third part of that, because Rome was, this pulling down of the city was in three lots. And so the western third was affected by this hail, fire, and it impacted the grass and the trees. And if you can see on your map, the Roman peninsula, that boot, that long leg that comes into the Mediterranean Sea, 395 was the year that the Visigoths entered into Roman territory, and they defeated Rome on the plains, on their fields throughout that peninsula, in their farmlands. They burnt the fields, they burnt the trees, they destroyed and beat Rome and Roman's army in that vast agricultural area of that Roman peninsula. And so it says that a third of the trees were burnt and a third of the grass was burnt, and they literally did burn. They came in, and the year that they came in historically was a drought in that Roman peninsula, in that Italian peninsula. It was dry and it just lit up, and that was their primary way of attack. Killing, blood, and they came from the north. You see in the top, in that northern area, the Germanic tribes, you see that on the map? That's where they came from, and they ascended down into Rome like a cold, from the cold regions, like hail descends from the cold sky onto the earth. And they burnt the fields, and they burnt the trees, and they defeated Rome. And they sacked Rome. They didn't actually overtake it, but they sacked Rome 3 years consecutive, 408, 409, and 410, under their king Alaric, king of the Visigoths. And you'll see my notes there. That began, and this is just the starting time of 395 AD. We moved to the second briefly, and that affected the third part of the sea and the ships. And we saw from 439, the Vandals under King Genseric occupied Carthage. And if you see the map, Carthage was in North Africa. You see that port city in the Roman territory. They occupied Carthage. Can you see it there? And their primary way that they defeated Rome was on water. They destroyed the ships. They were like pirates. They just came in and they burnt their ships. And there was one particular battle where the Vandals destroyed 1,113 ships in the Mediterranean Sea by fire. And they sacked Rome through the Tigris. They just floated up the river and then attacked the city. Also didn't take it though, but they heavily damaged Rome and its economy. The third was this shooting star, falling star that just screamed through the sky, and it fell on the earth. And this affected the rivers and the fountains of water. And so, unlike the Visigoths, which defeated Rome on the plains, the Vandals defeated Rome on the water. Attila the Hun, very short military career, only 3 years, from 450 AD to 453, and he died. But he came in the northern parts of Italy through the Alps, and he defeated Rome in the Alpine regions, where the fountains and the waters are. And their assaults were cruel, were fast, and it was a very short-lived campaign, but it was so dangerous that the people of Rome were scared, because they came in on horseback so quickly. There was just complete fear. And so this water, this effect of Attila the Hun with his Hunnish tribes came in, and it was a bitter existence, because you didn't know when they were coming and how fast they would come in, rape and pillage your village, burn and kill the main men, and gone before you could even blink. They were super fast, and it was a very bitter time. But it really pulled down Rome again another notch. And so we have the last Odoacer, king of Hurulai, and other mercenary men through the Germanic tribes took Rome. And it was in 457, over 1,200 years of Roman existence, Rome finally fell into the hands of a non-Roman, someone who was not Roman. And so the emperor ceased, known as the sun, that power in the sky. And we could relate to the dream of Joseph where the patriarchal and matriarchal powers and the brethren were the sun, moon, and the stars, and these equaled powerful people. And so the sun, the emperor, ceased from the year 476. Romulus Augustus was the last Roman emperor and was never to have another Roman emperor in Rome again from that year. And not just the sun, but the moon, the consul, the office of the consuls, 2IC if you like, also ceased. So the moon ceased. And the Senate, they were a republic, they had a Senate, and there were many men like the stars that contributed to the governing power of Rome. And after that time, the Senate also ceased to exist. And so there was this darkness that fell over Rome. And historically, this time is known as the Dark Ages. And so this was just a recap of last week, the fall of the Western Roman Empire. You notice it, 395 through to 476. It's only about 80 years. Someone could have lived through the whole lot. Someone with a knowledge of the 1,000+ years of Rome's power existence through the Mediterranean and all that it had accomplished. And within your lifetime, it's all gone. Completely gone. Incredible. And that time, from 476, there was this gap. And you'll notice on the chart that we've got there, 476, there's this break. What happened during that break? And it was really the rise of the papal power in this vacuum that the civil Roman power left behind. The Bishop of Rome started to grow his authority and power, and this little horn arose, as we understand in Daniel chapter 7, during this time period. And so this judgment, these trumpets, God was bringing down Western Rome. It was the first of his 3-plan attack upon this great city, the first 4 trumpets of Revelation. And the symbolism lines up with history chronologically, and you can't fault it. Many people do futurize the trumpets, but it's a cop-out, because you can futurize anything and say anything will happen, and unless it actually happens, you wouldn't know. So I believe the historicist point of understanding Revelation, where we see majority of it in the past and the small portion in the future, is far more reliable and able to build your faith. It builds my faith that there's a program, and I can see that we haven't, we're not given a program that we haven't even started yet. We've got a program that we're almost finished. Do you believe that? The program of this world is almost finished. You want to see most of it already in the past. We're living in incredible times. Jesus is coming. I'm very, very convinced of that. Every day it just grows, this conviction. Christ is coming. And the great thing about this is that the heavenly sanctuary is still open. Probation hasn't closed. While ever the most holy place activity is ongoing, the censer's not cast down. Amen? Your prayers can still be heard. And this is the good news about this program. You're seeing, just stop to think for a minute. We look in our lifetime and we look at, I mentioned my first historical memory was the Berlin Wall coming down as a little kid in the late 1980s. And that's nothing compared to the big strokes of history that God is portraying here. We're looking at these 80 years of these 4 attacks, and then there's a break. So we're going to go into the second part of the trumpets, and I'm going to be fairly brief. But we're going to start in Revelation chapter 9. Is it all making sense so far? Is the map helping? Is these fall of the Western Roman Empire up to 476 AD? Hope that's helpful. Revelation chapter 9. Revelation chapter 9, and this is the beginning of the woes. Actually, I'll read 8 verse 13, the verse before. And I beheld and heard an angel flying through the midst of heaven, saying with a loud voice, Woe, woe, woe unto the inhabitants of the earth, by reason of the other voices of the trumpet of the 3 angels which are yet to sound. So you can see there's this is yet to sound. You see these 4 following, and then there's a message saying, woe, woe, woe of what is to come, or is yet to happen. And so it's sort of indicating that there's a little break here. And the 5th angel sounded, and I saw a star fall from heaven unto earth, and unto him was given the key to the bottomless pit. And he opened the bottomless pit, and there arose a smoke out of the pit, as the smoke of a great furnace, and the sun and the air were darkened by reason of the smoke of the pit. So again, chronologically, we're looking for something in history from 476 AD, it has to be after that date, that involved a bottomless pit. It involved a star falling from heaven. So as we saw, the star in the first part was Attila the Hun. We identified a great leader. So we're looking for a great leader who has the keys to the bottom to open the bottomless pit, and out of it comes this smoke, and the smoke darkens the sun and the air. And just to be consistent with symbolism, the smoke, as we saw earlier in the chapter, the smoke of the incense were what? The prayers of the saints. So we're looking at religious activity through which involves prayer. You agree with that? So we're looking for a great leader that comes to a bottomless pit, also can be translated a desolate wasteland, that has a key that opens up this great prayer activity which darkens the sun. It blocks out the lights. And I believe it's 557 or 75. I can't remember off the top of my head. Someone might be able to correct me. Let's just roll with 557. But be a Berean and look it up. There was a man born in Mecca named Muhammad. And he was a merchantman. He grew as he became in his career. He was a trader. He traded, and he had a vision. He received a vision that he claims Gabriel came to him and gave him messages, and that he was the last prophet, and what he was to communicate was literally the word of God. And it was to restore back the purity of the Abrahamic promises. Actually included Abraham, and he was actually claims to be of the line of Ishmael. And so we see in history 630. You'll notice on this date 630 on your chart. And if you've got your map, can you see Mecca? It's in the green. You just notice where it is so you can get a visualization of where Mecca is. Where is it? In Arabia. Is Arabia a wasteland? It's just a desert. There's no sand. You want sand? It's a wasteland. And there was a key to open up this bottomless pit. So historically, Arabia was filled actually with a huge number of tribic peoples. Arabic tribal people. They were in their own tribes. They all had their own beliefs. It was a melting pot of religion. There was Christianity in that peninsula. There was polytheism of the Mesopotamia gods with multiple gods. There was Zoroastrianism, which was the religion of the the Persians. Cyrus was one, but they were monotheistic in that they believed in one God, not multiple gods. There were Jews also in this area. It was a melting pot of a whole lot of religious beliefs. But the interesting thing about the historical rise of Muhammad, he united all these people under one new religion. And it was like he had a key. He had a key to get everyone together, because no one could get these people together. They didn't come together. They weren't a united people at all. In fact, Rome never even saw them as a threat. The main threat that the Roman Empire, now we're talking here in the 6th and 7th century, you'll notice that the orange part on your map, that's pretty much all that existed in Roman power. The red had already fallen to the barbaric tribes. Does that make sense? The red was gone. So in your mind, you can wipe the red off. It's finished. A third part's finished. And you have the orange part here. And Rome's main enemy was the Persians. It wasn't the tribes in Arabia. They were scattered. They were disunited. That was just a wasteland. It wasn't really considered anything. The Sasanian Persian Empire, and they weren't Arabic. They weren't Islamic people. This was a different people altogether. In 630 was the year that Muhammad took over Mecca and established his empire. 630 AD, a Muslim, for those who don't know, a Muslim is just someone who adheres to Islam. Islam is the religion. A Muslim is the follower of that religion. So it's obvious, but maybe some aren't aware of the two terms. And so we see that in 630 was the first area of an Islamic power. And it was a key. This religion was based on a loyalty to one God, Allah. And your loyalty there's pillars that you have to do, and those pillars involved a lot of prayer, a lot of smoke, like a great furnace. But it blacked out the sun in that it was not truth. It was an error. And these these Arabic tribes started to band together. And there were a huge number of them. And it says, and there came out of the smoke locusts upon the earth, and unto them was given power as scorpions of the earth have power, and it was commanded them that they should not hurt. Now notice this, it was commanded them that they should not hurt the grass of the earth, neither any green thing, neither any tree, but only those men which have not the seal of God on their foreheads. What an interesting verse here. What were they told to do? It was commanded. Notice the language. It was commanded them that they were not to hurt the trees and the grass and any green thing, but only those who did not have the seal of God. After Muhammad's death, the next person to take over was Abubakar, yes, that is correct. Abubakar took over Muhammad, and he had a great message to tell the great hordes that were sitting in Arabia that were ready, more than ready, to start expanding their empire. Would you like me to read to you from history what Abubakar had to say to his army? I'm going to read it to you. It's quite interesting. These are his words, quoted. It's secular history. This is not rigged to prove my point. He said to his armies, "When you fight the battles of the Lord, acquit yourselves like men, without turning your backs. but let not your victory be stained with the blood of women or children. Destroy no palm trees and burn no fields of corn. This is what the commander-in-chief had to say to the Arabic hordes that were ready and united under this religion to make holy war. And the teaching is, when you go and you sacrifice in battle for, in a jihad or in a holy war to conquer lands for Allah, you will be rewarded in the next life. Their warfare was wrapped up in their religion, which is very different to Christianity. Christianity teaches that he that fights by the sword will die by the sword, doesn't it? It really doesn't encourage warfare. The Islamic power encouraged this, but the command was, don't destroy, don't cut down the fruit trees, and don't burn the fields. Isn't that amazing? It says, don't cut down the fruit trees, nor do any mischief to cattle, only such as you kill to eat. When you make any covenant or article, stand to it, be as good as your word. As you go on, you will find some religious persons living and retired in monasteries and propose to themselves to serve God that way. Let them alone, and neither kill them, nor destroy their monasteries. And you will find another sort of people that belong to the synagogue of Satan, who have shaven crowns. Be sure that you cleave their skulls, and you give them no quarter, till they either turn to Muhammad or pay tribute. So historically, the words of the leader to the military powers of this Arabic horde were simply this: you're going to go in to fight holy wars. So this is what united. This was the key that unlocked this unification in Arabia. And as they went, they were not to burn the trees, they were not to burn the fields. They were to, if they found people living out in monasteries in the hilltops who just said, we're here to serve God, leave them alone. Wouldn't you like to live in the country those days, eh? Just out of the way, serving God. I'm not trying to upset anyone. The direction was, leave those people alone. But you'll find another sort of people that have shaven heads, and they are part of the synagogue of Satan. And these were known as monks, Catholic monks. And they were to cleave their skulls, and they were to kill them, or if they didn't kill them, they had to become Muslim or pay a heavy tax. Interesting history, isn't it? And so when you read this language of this desolate area, this leader that comes, who has a key, he opens the bottomless pit. There are hordes of locusts that come out. And to them, they're not to hurt the trees or the grass, but only those who don't have the seal of God. And they named the Catholic monks as their target. In verse 5, and it says, and to them was given that they should not kill them, but they should be tormented 5 months, and their torment was as the torment of a scorpion when he striketh a man. So this torment now. And historically, when you look at the way that the Arabic people came and started conquering the Roman territory, they did it actually quite rapidly. In fact, they took all of Africa. On your map you can see, if you put all green, Africa and even majority of Spain was taken by Islamic power. And if you see the architecture in Spain has a Middle Eastern look to it compared to other architecture throughout Western Europe, you'll see that this power became a scourge to the growing power of Catholicism. Now, how many people here have heard of the Crusades? Have you ever heard of them, seen movies on the Crusades where the Western Roman lords get on their horses and get their armies with their big crosses and they're going? You've got to understand, this is the time period in which this is happening. These Crusades happened as the Islamic powers And they weren't really united fully. They had this one religion, and this religion was to dominate. It was to destroy, as we'll read. And they ended up taking the Holy Lands, Palestine. And the Christians genuinely believed that they needed to take it back. And to many crusaders, it was very religious for them to go back and fight these Arabic powers in the Middle East. And so for your context, when you're looking at history, you'll see, when you learn about the Crusades, these Crusades were heavily driven by the popes of Rome. The popes did not like the power that Islam was encroaching on its borders. And the main target of these people were Roman officials. Roman, papal, didn't matter. They were to destroy them. Now it says that they were to torment for 5 months. So a little bit of history. You'll notice the next date on here, 1299. You see that on the chart? 1299 AD. It was actually 27th of July, 1299. There was the 27th of July, 1299, was the first time that the Islamic powers attacked the heartland or Constantinople. So you can see Constantinople on your map. You'll see it there, right? And just so you know, the map says Byzantine Empire. Just so you're aware that name was given to the Eastern Roman Empire after its fall. Everyone within that empire identified as Romans. They didn't know this word Byzantium. They didn't relate to this. The fact that it's called Byzantium Empire was that when Constantinople was established, before it was built on the old city of Byzantium. So that's why the name came. So Byzantium was the city originally. The Emperor Constantine decided to move the capital of Rome from Rome to Constantinople. He named it after himself. And on the 27th of July, 1299, there were attacks against the capital. And whatever the territory of the Eastern Roman Empire had shrunk at this point, it was still quite powerful. When the Islamic tribes came in, they actually didn't really like to take everyone out. And so when you look at history, they actually took prisoners of war was their preference. Their preference wasn't to mass slaughter everyone. It was to take prisoners of war and make them as slaves. And the first thing that they would do was castrate all the men and make them eunuchs. And they would become slaves. They wouldn't actually be killed. And if they weren't slaves, they were taxed really heavily. The tax was so heavy that they pretty much were slaves just by the sheer amount of tax that they paid. And this went on for 150 years, where the power came that they were able to tax and to castrate the men, and it was pretty much a torture. Really, it was. I mean, they were subservient to this power. They were taxed so heavily. The only way that they could get any reprieve from their tax amount was to become Muslim. So you had 3 options. Well, you only had 2. Become a slave. Well, you had 3. Become a slave, get heavily taxed, or become Islamic, become Muslim. And this happened for 150 years. And so the Bible describes it that they were to torment the third part of men. this third part being the Eastern Roman power. And it says for 5 months. How many in the Jewish calendar? 30 days in 1 month. 5 times 30, 150. And something significant happened after that. We'll touch in a minute. And so we've covered this. They tormented for 5 months, and their torment was the torment of a scorpion when he striketh a man. And in those days shall men seek death and shall not find it, and shall desire to die, and death shall flee from them. And if you're a young man and you became a eunuch, you might wish to die. You might go, you're taxed, you're slave. It would have been depressing, very depressing. And that's the reality that this happened. It says, the shapes of the locusts were like unto horses, prepared unto battle. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I understand the German word for locusts means hay horse, when you interpret it directly. Is that correct? What's the German word for locust? What is it? How does that directly translate? Not hay horse? No. Okay. I could be wrong. There you go. So we might leave that point. It says, the shape were like unto horses prepared unto battle, and their heads were as the crowns like gold, and their faces were the faces of men. And this really describes the appearance of these types of hats that they wore, the long beards, and the way they rode their Arabian horses. Incredible horses. The movement, the mastery of these, and that was their primary war. They didn't have foot soldiers. It was all cavalry, horses. Everyone was on horses. And they had archers, and they could shoot forwards, they could shoot backwards, they just wreaked havoc. When they came in, there was very little that Rome could do to withstand this power. It says, and they had breastplates, as it were breastplates of iron, and it was true historically that they did wear breastplates when they rode. It says their hair was as the hair of a woman, and it is historically true that they had long hair, they had long beards, and they had long hair wrapped up in their turbans. And they were very brave men, because their whole structure around fighting was based on a religious tone in war. They were going to war to fight for God. And that made them incredibly brave, because they weren't really afraid of death, because it was through death that they got their rewards. And so it talks about their bravery, about being like lions. And it says, and their breastplates, as it were breastplates of iron, and the sound of their wings was as the sound of chariots, and many horses running to battle. And they had tails like scorpions, and they were stings in their tails, and their power was to hurt men 5 months. So they did not destroy the Eastern Roman Empire during that whole 150 years. They came in, they taxed a great portion of it, they enslaved a lot of people, but they did not take control of Constantinople. It says, and they had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in the Hebrew tongue is Adabon, and in the Greek tongue his name is Apollyon, which means destroyer. The religion is very violent in that it has its holy wars. Its jihads are a cornerstone in its foundation. And so it was a very destructive belief system. While they did have generosity for the poor amongst themselves. So they did care. They did care for many poor people. It was part of one of the pillars to give substance to the poor. But as far as an attacking power, they just definitely destroyed. Verse 13, and the sixth angel sounded, and I heard a voice from the 4 horns of the golden altar which is before God, saying to the sixth angel which hath trumpets, loose the 4 angels which are bound in the great river Euphrates. And the 4 angels were loosed that were prepared for an hour, a day, a month, and a year, for to slay the third part of men. So here, I just want to bring a note here that verse 13 shows again heaven. And every time in Revelation you get a glimpse of heaven, you should be able to put a rough time guide of where it is. Is it the most holy place or is it the holy place? And that gives you a context of whether the event should be placed pre-1844 or post-1844. Does that make sense? And so before the 6th angel sounded, I heard a voice from the 4 horns of the golden altar, which is before God, and this was the altar of incense. And so from 1 through to 6, the Bible indicates that the timing of this period is still while Christ is in the first apartment of the heavenly sanctuary. And then it says that there were 4 angels bound in the great river Euphrates. And you'll see that the watershed of the great river Euphrates is in Anatolia. In your map, you'll see that it comes down and it flows through, starts in Turkey, our modern-day Turkey, but flows through into Iraq, in Baghdad. You might be able to see it on the map, the great river Euphrates. Now, history says that from the rise of the Mohammedan power in 630 through till the end of this 150-year period in 1449, the Arabic powers pretty much kept sitting east of the Eastern Roman Empire. And they were kind of like held back. They just didn't take it over. Eastern Rome kept having its emperors, and it kept rolling on. Although it was severely tormented by the hordes, it was not conquered. And so there were 4 sultans, and a sultan was still had their powers. There were 4 sultans in 4 cities, and all the cities were in the watershed or on the river Euphrates. One was Aleppo, Iconium, Damascus, and Baghdad, all in that region. And when these 4 sultans joined together, and there was another power that was happening called Ottoman, if you're in history, they started to actually unite under Ottoman. And these powers that came out of this river Euphrates, and history tells us that this unification or this league that happened frightened the king or the emperor of Constantinople so much that in 27th of July 1449 there was the death of the emperor in Constantinople, and his name was Paleologos. Don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but that's his name. He died, and his son came to rule in 27th of July 1449. And he was so afraid of Ottoman and the Ottomans and the Turks and these Arabic powers that he went to them and asked permission. Can I rule or not? He had to ask permission. These 4 sultanries that united from the river Euphrates, along with Ottomans' already attacks on Constantinople, caused in 1449 the emperor to ask permission if he could rule. And that signified the fall of Rome. That signified it was only 4 years later that the physical warfare, they actually just removed him completely from power. In 1453 was the year that Eastern Rome fell, in that it never had any more king, but it was actually 1449 that pretty much you're asking someone else for permission, they're your rulers. that make sense? And this is significant in the way that the Ottoman Empire came to an end, also the exact same way. Now, it says here that these angels were loosed from the river Euphrates, and verse 15, and the 4 angels were loosed, which were prepared for an hour, a day, a month, and a year, for to slay the third part of men. Now we're talking about actually destroying now the Eastern Roman Empire completely. No longer just tormenting it by its attacks and its oppression. It actually just took it out. And it says, and there were the number of the army of horsemen were 200,000, and I heard the number of them. And thus I saw the horses in vision, and them that sat on them, having breastplates of fire and jacinth and brimstone, and the heads of the horses were as heads of lions, and out of their mouths issued fire, smoke, and brimstone. When you look at history, this battle where Constantinople fell was one of the very first battles where gunpowder was used. So you see these huge armies gathering up against Constantinople. They were all on horseback. They had guns, no longer spears and arrows, but they're riding along and they're shooting their guns, and they were not guns like today. They had this smoke that came from them. And so you saw this vision of these horses, so many of them all coming to slay the third part of men, and there was sulfur, this brimstone and smoke and fire, and they also used cannons. And it was the first time that we now understand our modern warfare of firearms. It started with the Arabic powers, and it's recorded here in this. And hasn't that been a woe to our world, firearms? It's been able to kill so many more people with so much more ease. Also, just a note that I forgot to mention about this smoke, out of the smoke, and it blocked out the sun. You know, just an interesting note about the Islamic power, that its symbol, and you'll notice that in a lot of Islamic flags, the Islamic symbol is a moon and a star. There's no sun. It's blocked out. There's a moon and a star. You'll see like the Pakistani flag and the West Saharan flag and I don't know how many other flags have this crescent with the star on it. You know, when you look at this power, and it says that this sun was, and look, I'm just drawing it could be nothing, but it's just interesting to note that they don't have the sun as part of their flag. It's the moon and the star only. And so it says that they were to slay the third part of men. It was prepared for a year, a day, a month. An hour, a day, a month, and a year to slay the third part of men. So a year equals 360 literal days in the Hebrew understanding. 1 month is 30. 1 day is 1 year. And 1 hour is 15 days. So you'll see on the chart 391 years and 15 days. How precise is that? So we're looking at the 27th of July, 1449, adding 391 years and 15 days brings you to the 11th of August, 1840. And for those who have read Great Controversy, you'll know that this understanding is endorsed by Ellen White through the book Great Controversy. And the Great Second Advent movement through Josiah Litch actually prophesied this time before it even happened. He wrote an article saying that the Ottoman power, the Ottoman Empire, which now occupied Constantinople, was pulled down. Do you know what they called the city after that? They called it Istanbul. That's where we have it today. We understand the Middle East as an Islamic is the Islamic world. It's only been like that. It used to be as much Western as Western Rome. It was all Roman. And now we understand, and this is what's shaped our world, this great power that has occupied the East. And so, just in brief history, I just want to make mention about these attacks. So, Islam, as we've established, was a scourge to the Roman power. as in the papal Roman power. 1515 actually, there was a king, Germany, King Charles V, who was very worried at the influence of Martin Luther in Western Europe. Charles V was a devout Roman Catholic, and he despised the Protestant Reformation, to the point that he gathered an army, and his intention was to destroy Protestantism by force, just bring them down. And the powers in Europe, the Protestant powers, they were powers that were espoused the Protestant cause, were no match to the German king Charles V. And they were pretty much looking down the barrel. They were going to be taken out. But the Protestant powers made an agreement with the Ottoman Turks to help them. And they did. And historically, if you look at it objectively, they scourged Rome so hard that it allowed the Protestant Reformation to be possible. It was at the time that people were trying to get to the Americas. Catholicism was trying to clamp down on this teachings of heresy, and this annoying scorpion sting beside them just kept taking them out. Venice, very wealthy Catholic powerhouse in the top of in Europe, was destroyed by the Ottoman Turks. They were a scourge to the Roman power. And I believe God used these trumpets, these woes, because they were a judgment against Rome, to allow the Protestant Reformation to happen. Believe it or not, but Islamic was a little bit more tolerant to Jews and non-Catholic Christians than the Catholics were. In fact, when they took over some of Spain, some of the Catholics were relieved. Some of the non-Catholic Christians were relieved. Yes, they had to pay heavy tax, but the scourge of Islam was against those who didn't have the seal of God, those who were Catholic. It says that they were prepared for 391 years and 15 days. And so on the 11th of August, 1840, Egypt and the Ottoman Empire were at war. And Egypt was about to take over the Ottoman power. And the Ottoman power was weakening. But the Ottoman power still wanted to rule. And so there was a message sent prior to the 11th of August to the Western powers of Europe, Britain, France, Germany, or Prussia at the time, Russia even. And their request was, we will surrender over to you if you help us against the Egyptians. It was like an ultimatum. And so there was an agreement written up in Western Europe, was given to the Ottoman Turks to give to Egypt. And it was delivered, believe it or not, on the 11th of August, 1840. And it was a document that simply said, we're now under the powers of Western Europe. If you continue to fight, you're going to be fighting the British powers. I mean, Britain was very powerful then. And Egypt decided to pull back. And so they retreated back into Egypt to allow the Ottomans to keep ruling. But from that point, their rule was now subject to the of the Western European powers. And you'll notice that through the First and Second World War, it was the Western European powers that could divide up the Middle East. We see the countries today, those countries and the map that we look at today in the Middle East was largely given by mandate, British and French mandate after the First and Second World War. Primarily the Second World War, because that Ottoman power was yielded to Western Europe. And so it was, the 11th of August, 1840 was the date that was delivered. How accurate is that? 15 days. Incredible. And so you see the end of this, the third part was killed. It was destroyed through gunpowder, fighting, many horses. But it says in verse 20, Revelation 9 verse 20, and the rest of men which were killed by these plagues, yet repented not of their works of their hands, that they should not worship devils and idols of gold and of silver and of brass and of stone and of wood, which neither can see nor can walk. Neither repented they of their murders, nor of their sorceries, nor of their fornication, nor of their thefts. So the bottom line was, after all this time, the Islamic power came in, Western Rome fell, Eastern Rome fell. Papal Rome did not repent, did not turn away from all the sins that it was committing before God. And so there is this gap. And you'll see in the chart there's a line. And believe it or not, there's 2 chapters of the Bible in between these two. And I understand you've been through Revelation 10 already. But Revelation 10 is a story of a great disappointment once a little book was opened, the book of Daniel, and a preaching was made that Jesus was coming in 1844, and it was a very bitter experience. And the message was, take it and prophesy again. And it was the heralding of the 3 angels' messages. And so you can see the program, Jesus to come. We're sitting at the end. We've gone through 6 trumpets already. And you'll see in this line, this is the beginning of the 3 angels' messages. What we are here for as a faith is part of God's program. And it's such a privilege to be part of it. Such a privilege to be part of it. To be able to surrender our life to Christ and be part of His program in this time where He's orchestrating. He is the King of this world. He will destroy the nations. There's no doubt about that. But to be part of that, He is trying to spread the gospel message, the everlasting gospel, to every nation, kindred, tongue, and people. And when that's done, Revelation 11 and verse 15, and the 7th angel sounded, and there was great voices in heaven saying, the kingdom of this world are become the kingdoms of our Lord and of His Christ, and He shall reign forever and ever. And the 24 elders which sat before God on their seats fell on their faces and worshipped God, saying, we give Thee thanks, O Lord God Almighty, which was and art to come, because Thou hast taken Thy great power and hast reigned. Verse 18, Revelation 11, verse 18, and the nations were angry. And Thy wrath is come, and the time of the dead, that they should be judged. And Thou shouldest give reward unto the servants, Thy prophets, and to the saints, and to them that fear Thy name, small and great, and should destroy them which have destroyed the earth, which destroy the earth. And the temple of God was open in heaven. And there was seen in His temple, what was seen now? The ark of His testament. So now this is post 1844. Now this is a different part of the heavenly sanctuary. And there were thunderings, there was lightnings and voices and thunderings and an earthquake and great hail. And this is the language of the 7 last plagues. The nations are angry. Christ is coming to reign. This is the next trumpet. It's been a program that God has had. And why has it stretched out so long? God's in the business of saving mankind. He's in the business of saving people. He didn't want to wrap it up all in one year. He wants to get the most he can for the death on the cross. God is a businessman. He expects a return from his investment. He gave his life on Calvary, and he is allowing this large period of time to span, and he has spelt out the program over what's this, over 1,700 plus years. Why so long? So that we could be part of it. We weren't born all back then, we are only recent. God's giving us an opportunity. But be sure, brothers and sisters, a time is coming where this seventh angel will sound. And I don't believe it's too far away. The nations are angry. And the great city, this last third, the great city will come in remembrance before God. And the message simply is, come out of her, my people. Be not partakers of her sins. Or you'll be partakers of her plagues. And so the story of the 7 last plagues, which we'll cover later in this, as we go through Revelation as a church, is simply the 7th, is the third woe. A time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation. It's a time when he that is holy will be holy still. He that is unclean will be unclean. There comes a time of a door closing that no man can open. Are you ready? How to be ready? One of my daughters asked me, how do you be ready, Dad? You've got to put it all on the line to God. Say, I'm yours. It's not hard. It's not hard to be ready. In that, if you give yourself to God, all your problems are his problems. Do you think God can sort your problems out? He can, and he knows the time frame. He understands. He will not turn anyone away that comes to him. You just say, Lord, I'm all yours. Everything I have, everything I own, everything. And if I'm wrong, sort me out. If I've got problems, sort me out. I'm your problem now. And rest in his grace and rest in his promises. Because he's promised that those who come to him by no means will he cast out. And so for anyone who is not sure, how do I become God's? It's not hard. You just need to pray and with the deepest part of your soul and say, Lord, I accept your sacrifice on Calvary. You are my owner by creation and by redemption. And I'm yours. I'm part of your kingdom. It's through prayer. It's that ascension of that smoke up into heaven that is truth as we claim the merits of Christ for all our shortcomings. So I know today's sermon was long. We've now completed the 7 trumpets. I hope you have an appreciation of what they are. They are heavily symbolic. We haven't touched every single element, but we only had a sermon to do it in. May God bless us as we prepare for his soon coming. Amen.